One of the core findings of our research is that the political arguments that are going to be effective for building a bigger consensus in the US is usually an argument you haven't heard before. It's an argument that advocates for a policy or a candidate in terms of the values and beliefs of the people that are being targeted for persuasion. We've tested this idea both ways. We've looked at whether liberal policy positions do better when they're framed in terms of conservative values, and we find that they do because they pull greater support from conservatives and sometimes moderates. And then we've also looked at whether conservative policy positions perform better when they're reframed in terms of liberal values. And again, we find that they do. So for example, if you were to reframe military spending as consistent with equality of opportunity and social justice, making the case for the military as an institution where the poor and minorities can achieve on a relatively level playing field with other Americans, liberals will be more open to supporting high levels of military spending after they hear an argument like that. A few years ago, we got really interested in same-sex marriage attitudes, and we were interested in whether certain persuasive techniques might be more effective for building support for same-sex marriage. And so to explore this idea, we ran an experiment where we had people either read a relatively conventional argument for same-sex marriage that said that gay marriage should be legal because of the values of equality and fairness. Gay people should have the same rights as anybody else. We compared the effects of that message to a very different message that made the case for same-sex marriage in terms of the values of patriotism and group loyalty. And it said that gay people are proud, patriotic Americans, they serve in the military, they contribute to our economy and our society, and for that reason, they deserve the same rights as anybody else. And what we found is that that second message was significantly more persuasive. And it was especially more persuasive with conservatives, who are normally reluctant to support same-sex marriage, especially at the time we ran the study a few years ago. But then when they heard that argument in terms of their own values, more conservative values around patriotism, group loyalty, they said, oh, okay, like this is starting to speak to me. And some of them moved their positions on these issues. Most recently, we ran an experiment on how to make the most persuasive appeal you could for an economically progressive political candidate, and specifically a presidential candidate. So we were interested in, is there a way to build greater levels of support for economically progressive candidates? And the reason we were interested in this is that if you look historically, Americans are actually quite supportive of federal jobs programs, minimum wage increases, paid family leave, these sorts of programs. They poll very well in America. But Americans don't necessarily vote for the candidates that would pass those policies, and so they don't get passed at a high rate. So we're very interested in this puzzle. So what we did was we constructed an experiment where we had a candidate who supported these pretty popular policies, and we either had them talk about those policies in terms of classically liberal values like equality, social justice, protecting vulnerable people, or we had them talk about them in what are often thought to be more conservative values of respect for tradition, caring for family, the American dream, things like that. And what we found was that candidate, that second candidate that talked in terms of more conservative values, but about economically progressive policies, was clearly the most popular candidate in the experiment that we ran. They gained extra support from moderates and conservatives alike, and they, were essentially, in the study we ran, a shoo-in to win in an election. One thing that I think is really attractive about moral reframing is it offers an alternative to our only real technique that we think of now as a way to build political consensus, which is compromise. Compromise on policy, move to the perceived middle, and that's going to be the way to pick up 51% of voters or get something passed. And that's an unsatisfying tool if it's the only tool you have. And so it's attractive, I think, to have another alternative, another way that you could add voters, add people to your base of support besides just changing the policy positions you advocate for, especially if you think those are the right policy positions. You think about Barack Obama, Ronald Reagan, these are people who could intuit what a given audience needed, and say that idea that a majority of people were going to turn out to be moved by, and potentially say different things to different groups. We often think that if you're saying different things to different groups, that means you're a flip-flopper or you're insincere or you're being cynical or something like that. But I think that that's not really a realistic critique in a polarized society. In a polarized society where people value different things, they have incredibly diverse backgrounds, we're going to have to be comfortable with the fact that people are going to have different reasons for agreeing on things, that people are going to come to major issues like inequality or climate change and potentially take the same side on them, but for very different reasons. And if we're not comfortable with that, we're not going to get political consensus. I think that if we're going to resolve all these tensions productively, it's going to mean that we somehow turn towards one another and saw some humanity across political lines. Like maybe the existing strategies worked so badly that we wound up saying, you know what, we're not going to do it that way. The politics of division, they're not working, they're hurting the country as a whole, and they're not really even helping my side get a critical mass to pass anything. And so I'm going to try a different way. And then that's going to be us turning towards each other and seeing a common humanity that we struggle to see now.